So chapter 5 of Deltarune just came out. Yeah, why do I even try? And well, as you all know, the end is coming soon. There are 2 more chapters left. You probably know this already, and a lot of people already asked this question, but how the hell is Toby Fox gonna wrap up everything in 2 chapters with the amount of unanswered questions that are left? Why is Flowery not an unlikable asshole like he was in Undertale? Why does Kris keep making fountains? Why is Rousey still there throughout all the adventures, and why is he not turning to stone like the other Darkners? What in the hell is in the shelter? Why do you have to be gay to find true love in Deltarune? You know, there's all of these theories and lore that we still don't know since 2015, Jesus Christ. But today, I just want to answer one of those questions. I'm going to, well, at least try to guess what the hell's the final boss of the last 2 chapters of this godforsaken franchise is gonna be. So far, we fought playing cards, a laptop, a TV, an apple, and finally the most recent chapter was pretty Hatsune Miku and Gerald. Hey guys. Well, those are the most notable ones that I can think of anyways. Now, for the Shadow Crystal bosses like Mew Mew or Neo Spamton, it's implied by Sham, I think that's how you say his name, that there's not gonna be any more of those in chapter 6 or 7. I swear, Toby excluded those 2 chapter numbers on purpose, but I just can't prove it. You can see in these 2 messages from Sham that we're probably gonna be fighting main story bosses of chapter 5. Or there's more lore coming that we'd probably get or something, I don't know. No more Shadow Crystal hidden bosses, we're talking about the main boss of the final chapters. And I do understand that even though Shadow Crystal bosses might not even come back, some other type of hidden boss might still appear in chapter 6 or 7. If we're talking about the final boss, then we can probably rule out a lot of characters immediately. It's probably not gonna be some random Darkner we've never met before. Because if Toby Fox wants the ending to actually hit, the final boss has to be someone we've spent the entire game building towards to, in my opinion. But honestly, there aren't that many candidates left. Let's start with the most obvious one, why don't we? The Roaring Knight, or Deer Mime I guess, which is implied, it's not actually confirmed. The evidence is mostly circumstantial. The Knight's silhouette has these antler-looking horns, and Carol Holiday just so happens to be a major character we've heard about for 5 chapters straight, without actually seeing much of her. But honestly, the bigger reason people suspect her isn't the design. It's because Toby Fox keeps putting her in the damn story. Also, do you hear her talk sound effect? That shit's villainous as fuck. Since chapter 3, Carol has basically been hanging over everything in the background. Noelle talks about her, Rudy talks about her, the town talks about her, and every chapter seems to remind us that she's an important character. That's usually not something you do with a character unless they're eventually going to matter. There's also the fact that when we're not in control, Kris gets a phone call with an unidentified caller in chapter 4. We never learn who it is, but considering how few major characters are still being kept deliberately mysterious at this point in the story, a lot of people immediately started looking at Carol. And honestly, I get it. If Carol really is the Knight, then she checks a lot of boxes. She's connected to Noelle, one of the most important characters in the game. She's been built up for multiple chapters, and she'd be someone the player actually recognizes when the reveal happens. The problem is that she's almost too obvious. Knowing how sly this freaking dog is, I feel like she's being set up to be a dud villain. Maybe the main villain in chapter 6, then the true villain will appear in chapter 7. All this character development and hints, I don't believe it's that simple. Or maybe it is and I'm just wilding. Or maybe it's the dad actually. Whatever. But if Carol is the obvious answer, then we have to talk about something that's been hanging over Deltarune since the very beginning. The Angel. Because remember, the Knight isn't necessarily the end goal. The entire Roaring is tied to this prophecy about the Angel, and we've spent the entire game hearing about some mysterious being who's supposedly going to bring salvation to the world. And we still have no fucking idea who the Angel actually is. Which is kind of a problem when we're 2 chapters away from the ending. There are a bunch of different possibilities here. Maybe the Angel is an actual character we've already met. Maybe it's someone we haven't seen yet. Or maybe the Angel isn't even a person. Because Deltarune has spent a lot of time messing with the idea of gods, religion, and who's actually controlling this world. So when the game keeps telling us that there's this mysterious angel at the end of everything, I don't think Toby is going to make the answer something as simple as, oh, it's this guy. And that's also why I don't think the Angel and the Roaring Knight necessarily have to be the same person. The Knight could be the person setting everything up, while the Angel is the thing that we're actually going to have to fight at the end. And if that's the case, then chapter 6 could be where we finally deal with the Knight, while chapter 7 introduces whatever the hell the Angel actually is. Now, this is a bit more interesting, I think. Kris. And before you say it, no, I don't think Kris is secretly evil and has been plotting the Roaring this entire time. Well, even though he definitely looks like it at times. The game has made it pretty clear that Kris and the Knight aren't necessarily the same person. We've literally seen Kris make fountains while the Knight is doing their own thing, and chapter 5 makes this even weirder because Kris creates the Flower Kingdom fountain themselves, and then the Knight shows up afterwards and creates another one. So if Kris isn't the Knight, then what the hell are they doing? And that's what makes Kris such an interesting candidate for the final boss, because Deltarune isn't really a story about stopping some evil guy, it's a story about Kris. And more specifically, it's a story about Kris being controlled by us. Actually, this goes all the way back in the very first time you open Deltarune in chapter 1. The game asks you to create a vessel. You get to choose its appearance, its body, basically everything about this character, and then the game just throws it away willy-nilly. Instead, we're put inside Kris, and I think that's a really important distinction. We don't become Kris, we're put inside Kris. Right from the very beginning, Deltarune establishes that the player and the character they're controlling are two separate things, and Kris doesn't really want in him sometimes. That actually sounds really wrong. Anyways, we've seen Kris rip the soul out of their body, walk around without us, and make decisions completely independently. So maybe that discarded vessel wasn't just some weird opening gimmick, but instead a hint that this entire story is going to end with a conflict between the player and Kris. I mean, we've spent the entire game forcing Kris to do things they don't necessarily want to do. Like, whenever Kris gets the opportunity, they literally throw us out of their body. So eventually, I have to imagine this conflict is going somewhere. What happens when Kris finally gets enough of us? We start the game by trying to create our own character, only for that vessel to be rejected and for us to be forced into Kris instead. And then we spend the rest of the game controlling someone who clearly has a will of their own. So what better way to end it than having the character we've been controlling finally say no? And maybe that's why I don't think Kris being the final boss necessarily means Kris is the villain. They could just be the final obstacle between us and whatever the hell we think we're supposed to accomplish. But well, do I actually think Kris is going to be the final boss? Not really? But I do think Kris is probably going to be involved in whatever the final confrontation actually is. And now we have a wild card. What if the final boss isn't someone we've met yet? Because there are still some pretty damn important Undertale characters who haven't appeared in Deltarune. The obvious one is Papyrus, but there's also Azrael, who's literally Kris's brother. We've spent 5 chapters hearing about these characters without actually meeting them. And considering we're now approaching the final 2 chapters, that gets pretty suspicious. Especially Papyrus, because Toby hasn't just forgotten about him, right? The game keeps reminding us that he's there. So if one of these missing characters finally shows up in chapter 6 or 7, I wouldn't be surprised if they're much more important than just another cameo. Okay, now finally, for the completely out-of-pocket prediction of a final boss, maybe an entity or something that's around with the fourth wall. Gaster or even us may be the player. At this point, Deltarune has spent way too much time around with the fourth wall, control, and this mysterious presence behind the game for me to completely ignore the possibility. Maybe we'll finally find out what the hell has been behind all these fourth wall breaks this entire time. This applies to Undertale too, but anyways. Hey, a quick update before the outro or ending, whatever. I just realized after editing, but a lot of these fourth wall breaks in Deltarune are from Ralsei. Coincidentally, I also found this short on how Ralsei is a Titan Larvix Darkner. So yeah, I guess Goat Titan is also a candidate for the final boss of Deltarune. Of course, the final boss is gonna be gay as well. Honestly, I don't think I can 100% say what the ending is going to be. There's so much possibilities of how the story is gonna go, and I'm only a LARP Pro grade fan compared to someone who's been in the community for longer. But anyways, I think that's it for the video. I know there's a lot more candidates that I didn't list, but my brain is too fried to go any further. Well, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.